we're getting ready to get in our top 5. Why don't you let the people know what exactly we are doing?
A couple months back, we did characters we like better in the comics than Snap. So the characters that we love in the comics but don't use at the same rate in Snap. And so I said, well, let's flip it around as I change my list one more time. And let's do characters we like better in Snap than in the comics. So characters that we like to use in our decks, but that we would not pick up a comic for and might actively avoid a comic if they were starring in.
Yeah. All right, well.
Who makes that list? I had a lot of nominees, and I got to be honest, some of my criteria shifted. But these are 5 characters that I definitely like more in Snap than I do in the comics.
Okay. Number 5 is going to be, for me, Quicksilver.
Understandable. Not on my list, but yeah.
This speedster doesn't mess around. He's a measly 1 cost, but he has the ability of being in your opening hand, and he's always kind of like that friend that's early to the party and ready to get things started. So he's there. Now, for me, he finds his way into my Shulkanaut deck, and that's really about the only spot that I have him in, but he's very useful there because it gives me an advantage right at the beginning of things, sets the tone. But what about the comics? Well, to me, he's always come across as constantly impatient and very abrasive. He's always critical of his sister Wanda. And you tell me, is this guy a hero or a villain? Because with Quicksilver, pun intended, it's kind of hard to keep up sometimes. So there you go.
I like that. And I did not think of Quicksilver. He is a character that I often dislike in the comics, but he's supposed to be.
Okay.
So I'm not saying you're wrong, but he is unlikable. And that's one of his character traits. Although recently, this will weird you out. You remember M from Generation X?
M.
Monet.
No, okay. No. Tell me about the character.
Oh, she was Muslim. She would occasionally be catatonic, but when she wasn't catatonic, she was like the Massachusetts Academy's mean girl, super strong, flight, telepathy.
Okay. All right. So
anyway, in Uncanny Avengers, guess who she's making out with?
Oh my goodness.
Quicksilver.
Ew,
who always
wow.
looks who's not that young a guy. I know the white hair makes him look older, but that's just weird. Be even weirder if you but anywho. But as far as the impatient thing, I believe it's X Factor number 87. Classic Marvel comic where that was when X Factor was working for the government and they needed someone to do psychiatric evaluations of the members of X Factor. Well, if you need a psychiatrist in the Marvel Universe, who do you get?
Doc Samson?
There you go. So this was written by Peter David, and it was Doc Samson talking with the members of X Factor. And when it got to Quicksilver, he was talking to Quicksilver about his attitude, and Quicksilver says, you ever been in line behind someone in the grocery store who's just taking forever? You know how frustrating that is? That's how I feel all the time.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I get that, and yes, he does have his uses in Snap, and he is unlikable in the comics. Didn't make my list, but I get where you're coming from.
All right, what's your number 5?
Mine is not a character I dislike because this character hasn't been around enough to generate a strong feeling one way or the other. Okay. But despite that, I use him a lot in Marvel Snap, and that's Iron Lad.
Iron Lad, all right, okay.
Iron Lad, he's shown up here and there, I'm sure. I read a Kang one-shot that had a little about him, because he is Kang. He's teenage Kang who went back in time to get the Avengers to stop him from becoming Kang. What he ended up doing was forming the Young Avengers, and then his older self came back, and by the end of the first story arc, he was living in the Vision's body and dating Ant-Man's daughter, and the less we think about that, the better. But, so I thought it was kind of weird when they put Iron Lad in there, and he's just not a character. He's a cool trivia question. That's a great setup, Kang going back in time to stop himself by rallying the Avengers, but it really amounted to one storyline, and then he was a different character.
True.
So he didn't make much impression on me one way or the other, but he is quite helpful in my Living Iron Slot deck, and, of course, a great team-up partner with Howard the Duck, just like in Marvel Team Up, number never happened.
Right. Okay, yeah, good pick. Well, what's your number 4?
Well, actually, my number 4 should probably be lowered to number 3 because it's Zabu.
Okay. Wow.
Again, not a character I dislike, but someone I barely think of as a character. He's like Kazar's accessory. He's just like Kazar. Oh, yeah. And going back to the Marvel role-playing game, I don't know that Zabu would be a character. He would just be listed on Kazar's character sheet as like, oh, yeah, and he has this saber-toothed tiger. So when they made him a featured card and a card at all, I was like, I don't know. So it's like, are we going to have Red Wing now with the Falcon?
With the Falcon.
But then, as I said earlier, when I got Zabu, Zabu's good stuff. Zabu's in a lot more of my decks than Kazar and Shauna and a lot of other characters that I read about and follow in the comics. Never really been on my radar in the comics. Really like him in Marvel Snap.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. All right, my number 4, I'm going with Gambit.
All
right. Even at 14 years old, the mid-90s, it's getting close to the height of the bad girl era. All right. I still thought Gambit was kind of a creep. The guy could not stop flirting with Rogue. Now, granted, there was some chemistry there. Those two definitely had a thing for each other, but he also didn't.
They're married now, Jesse.
Oh, are they? Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
They needed to be. He was a flirt. He always had this bit of secrecy behind him. I know we've made references to the X-Trader quite a few times on this show. So you didn't know if you could trust this guy. And when it comes to the game, though, that kind of all fades away for me. Because what Gambit is just a death dealer. A guy that, okay, bring it on. I've got Gambit in my decks. He's clearly paired with Wong or some other type of discard deck over and over and over, and he can help wipe out that other side. So do I have more of an appreciation for him in Snap than I do in the comics? Absolutely, because I'm more worried about what card that he's tossing his own cards at, I guess I should say, than who he's trying to steal a kiss from next. So there you go. I've gone with Gambit as my number 4. So that takes me.
You may be the first person I've heard of that doesn't like Gambit.
He's just mon chéri. I don't know. Not a fan.
Pepe Le Pew joined the X-Men. Come
on. Next up, my number 3 is going to be Shadow King. And Shadow King, I think we both talked about how we just could not get this guy's ability to work right in Snap. But all I can remember from the comics is how, and I mentioned this earlier, how he came out of the pages of X-Men, where he was given Charles Xavier a hard time, but he was always this background shadowy character that just did not make an impact for me. He's an ancient, malevolent entity devoted purely to enslaving other people. He represents kind of this one-dimensional evil archetype, this thing that it's out there and that's it. Not much depth to this character, it seems. And whenever he was on the pages, I was just like, I could not keep my eyes from glazing over. So he makes it higher on this list because I have a larger dislike for him in the comics than I do in Snap. But I have found some use for him lately. He really found a home in my C2 deck. I have been able to use him quite a bit against. He was going to be there for Collector tonight. He didn't exactly make that much of an impact. He hit him once, but he's there for Sunspot. He's there for Blob. He's there for Null, and he can reduce these people's powers back down to their original power. And it's a nice card to have he's a 2 cost. So at the end, you can whip him out there and eliminate a big threat. So there you go. I'm going with Shadow King for my number 3. How about you?
I don't like Shadow King in Snap or the comics. My number 3 is also from the X universe. He's grown on me a little bit in the comics, but it's Daken.
Daken!
He's another shadowy part of Wolverine's past. He's Wolverine's son. He's got a claw that comes out of the bottom of his wrist instead of the top. Wrist? Ooh, yeah.
Gosh. Oh,
yeah,
man.
2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. I don't know. A lot of times his defining character trait and only character trait other than killing is that he's bisexual, and they have to remind you of that because he has to have had sex with or want to have sex with just about everybody on the page. So they got to whack you over the head with that all the time. it seems. And then his original card even wasn't that thrilled with him. It's a guy with a mohawk and no shirt. Can he have a costume? At least on Puzzle Quest, he had that Wolverine brown and yellow costume, so he looked kind of cool, even though I didn't like the character. But then I got the Dan Hip card, which is a whole lot better. And I don't know, I've found some uses for him. I still need to figure out a way. Doubling his power once to 8 is good. Doing it more is better. But I keep finding ways to work Dakin into my decks on Snap, whereas I would not be disappointed if Dakin was out of comics I'm reading.
Okay. All right then. Well, let's talk about your number 2 then.
Okay, well, this guy appears on a lot of my lists. And usually when we're making a top 5, there's always room for M'Baku.
Oh, my goodness, M'Baku.
M'Baku, who I would have had trouble a few years ago even telling you who he was in the comics. Again, as we mentioned earlier, he went by Man-Ape, who was a guy who had killed a white mountain gorilla and wore that as a costume. And I'm sure somebody thought that was a perfectly harmless, cool representation at some point, but it hasn't aged well. He even appeared in part of Christopher Priest's run on Black Panther, which I bring up on your podcast as often as I possibly can, and I forgot about it until I was looking it up to confirm that he was a member of the Lethal Legion, and I saw that cover. I don't remember what he did in there. Now, part of the reason I like him better is this is his MCU version, and I love Winston Duke's portrayal of him as this guy who is arrogant and can be kind of a jerk, but deep down does the right thing. And especially in Wakanda Forever has kind of become wise Uncle M'Baku. And so I love him in that, and I love that representation of him in the game, and I love that he pops in. Like I said, I've won more games with M'Baku than with Captain Marvel. And he's just always a fun presence in the game, whereas in the comics, I can't even remember when I've read about him.
Yeah. That's a good addition to this list. My number two. I want to ask you a question, and you might have an answer for it, but I already have my answer. Is there a Super Scroll book out there that's worth reading?
There was one.
Maybe.
I don't know that it was worth reading.
Have I read it? Nope. I have not read it. Yeah, Super Scroll is my number 2. And when you have a character that copies abilities in comics, okay, meh. All right. Well, you're getting a copycat character. Super Scroll, he looks neat. I can remember seeing him on the cover or some pictures of him. Oh my gosh, he's got one arm that looks like the Thing's, and the other one is on fire, and then he's stretching it all out. Okay, he's a neat villain when you think about that, but when it comes to a power set, you're kind of cheaping out a little bit there. But in Snap, though, hold your horses, buddy. Give me that living iron slot combo you got going on over there, pal, because I'm going to do it better. Super Scroll has been a staple in my decks for quite a while, and I find him very useful in quite a few games. So I'm going to go ahead and give Super Scroll my number 2 spot, just because I don't find him very interesting in the comics at all, but in Marvel Snap, I dig him. So we reached our number 1 spot, and what do you think the chances are that we both have the same? Because we haven't overlapped at all. Yeah. What do you think the chances are our number 1 is going to be the same?
I think there might be a decent chance.
Okay. All right.
Less than 50-50, but
okay. All right. Well, let's find out here.
I know we did one list recently where you were sure.
Oh, I was absolutely certain.
And you were so sure that I started to be sure, and you were.
I was completely wrong.
That was actually the flip side of this one. The characters we like better in the comics than in Snap.
That's true. The character that I like better in Snap than in the comics, Arnim Zola.
Ah, okay. He almost made my list.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. So the Arnim Zola character is pretty problematic. We've talked about that quite a few, but I've got a list here of why. Here we go. Number 1, Nazi association in the comics. Zola is portrayed as a Nazi scientist who worked for Hitler and the Third Reich during World War II. His willing collaboration with the Nazis and their genocidal ideology is highly problematic. Number 2, unethical experimentation. Zola is depicted as conducting unethical and immoral genetic experiments, often on unwilling human subjects. This disregard for human rights and dignity is deeply troubling. Number 3, creation of hate groups. Zola's experiments led to the creation of hate groups like the Hate Monger, promoting ideologies of racism and bigotry. Hate-monger was a person. They weren't a group, were they?
No, I think there have been multiple hate mongers. I think maybe one was a robot. I don't know a lot about the hate monger, but I will say, and you don't get a lot of people defending the hate monger, but hate monger just hates everybody.
Okay.
he fans the flames of racial stuff, but he just hates everybody.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So in that regard, I've always viewed him as pretty much an equal opportunity hater.
Okay. All right. All right.
I did not think I would be defending hate monger. But yes, Arnim Zola is a scumbag. Continue.
You wouldn't touch this character with a 10-foot pole, and you would think that he would be the least desirable card in Marvel Snap. But I ask you, Evan Bevins, don't you want that 16 power Black Panther?
Only 16?
Could be 32. What about two massive nulls?
One with Wong, yeah. Null,
right.
Venom. Oh, I can't tell you how many games I've lost. Venom, right. Arnim Zola.
Venom eating everything in sight after dropping Zola on Bar Sinister, accessing the ever-elusive fast-forward screen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So I can't ever like Arnim Zola in the comics. But there you go. Arnim Zola makes my number one Marvel Snap card that I like more than the character in the comics. What is your number one Evan Bevins?
Well, first of all, I do want to say, yes, Arnim Zola, not likable at all. Although I do remember him, he's always been to me just the generic mad scientist. And yes, also a Nazi. Although sometimes Marvel gets away with it with the villains that are, well, we worked with the Nazis because they were the baddest guys around, but we just hate everybody, much like the hate monger. So I don't know. I guess it's a little like Quicksilver. I don't like him, but he's not supposed to be likable. I'm not saying that makes you wrong. I'm just saying that may be why he didn't stand out to me as much, because it's like, it's Arnim Zola. He's just, the Red Skull needs some science done. I'll bring in Arnim Zola.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, I did think about him because he is useful, and it does feel weird every time he teams up with Black Panther. They work so well together. But my number one is a character who I have read about frequently in comics, but it always seems like I'm hearing people talk about him rather than seeing him do stuff. And when he does stuff, even when there's an entire event named after him, I don't remember him doing much. He looks cool. People always talk about him like he's scary, but I just never see that much action from Annihilus.
Annihilus.
Great name. Intimidating name, but he just always seems like this generic cosmic bad guy that's out there. Now, maybe I just haven't read the right Annihilus stories, but Annihilus has always just been But in Marvel Snap, Annihilus gets stuff done. He sends the Void over to your opponent. He sends the Hood over to your opponent. And let's face it, anytime the Hood goes away, it's a good thing. Speaking of characters that are supposed to be unlikable and are very unlikable in the comics. But so yeah, Annihilus, when I saw what he could do, he was a card I wanted. I got him. I still go back to that Annihilus deck once or twice a season. It's always effective, and unlike the comics, I like it when Annihilus shows up on my side. Whereas in the comics, Annihilus, he killed the Human Torch, for crying out loud, but not really. And I still wasn't impressed.
Yeah, I cannot say that I've read much with Annihilus in it. I can remember, I know a lot of stuff about the Negative Zone, but as far as I know, just like you said, he's sitting over there hanging out, and anytime you saw him, if he was just complaining about something, that was usually what I saw.
You remember Annihilation, the story that gave us the present-day Guardians of the Galaxy that launched the most unlikely franchise in the MCU, that brought Nova back to prominence, that gave us a comic starring the Super Skrull, that breathed life into Marvel cosmic stories again. It was called Annihilation. You know why it was called Annihilation? Because Annihilus was the big bad. I still barely remember him.
Wow.
It was the Annihilation Wave, this wave of insectoid creatures from the Negative Zone. Annihilus was the big bad. And still, I'm like, really? Annihilus?
That's a good pick, though.
If he shows up in the MCU, he's going to get punched. He's going to be a throwaway villain.
Oh, that's sad. That's sad. Well, that right there is our top 5 characters in Marvel Snap that we appreciate more than their rendition in the comics. I think this brings our discussion on this whole Snap material to a close. We're going to go ahead and get into plugs. Evan Bevins, why don't you tell everybody what you have going on over there on either your blog or some appearances on podcasts? What's been going on?
Well, over at asterisk51.blogspot.com, I am gearing up to start my read-through for the first time in its entirety of the Amalgam Age of Comics.
Oh my goodness,
Marvel
that's exciting.
DC are finally getting ready to reprint them, so I figured this was as good a time as any. We'll kick it off soon with Super Soldier, the mashup of Captain America and Superman. And when we get to Speed Demon, I'll be sure to include a link back to our discussion on Unspoken Issues of that. And I'm trying to get back into doing every other week a Free Comic Friday, looking back at some of those issues we got on Free Comic Book Day and other times and seeing if they were worth the price. I don't think I found one that wasn't, but more looking at if they did what they were supposed to do, which was get me interested enough to check out other issues. So there have been some interesting ones. Let's see, 2000 AD with the 2000 AD All Ages special with Pandora Perfect. I ordered that, some of her adventures from the library. That was pretty neat. Street Angel. There was one called Street Angel's Dog about a homeless teenage ninja who rescues a stray dog. I'm curious to check some more of that out. So I hoard all these issues. About time I used them for something.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And then I do have over on Magazines and Monsters, I'll be doing another episode of The Brave and the Bob with Billy D. Looking at the Brave and the Bold issues, the Batman team-ups that Bob Haney wrote, which is just crazy.
Bonkers.
Yes, wonderful comic book adventures. So check out those episodes, and if you get a chance to read some of those issues, it's just so much fun.
Very cool. All right. Well, for myself, in the archive as of this recording, Monday the 11th of March, you can hear me and Dean and Matthew Price get together and talk about Punisher Ghosts of Innocence, which is a prestige format tale of the Punisher that came out, I think, I want to say it was 95 or maybe 93. Either way, it's a 2-issue kind of trade, and it was really good. It was one of those, wasn't code approved. It was a $6 book, I think is what we determined, $6 or $7 book. I think it was $6. But anyway, Punisher ends up there's debate. We have a debate on there as to whether the Punisher was the cause of what happened, but after trying to stop these guys from doing a drug deal, they jump onto a school bus full of children, and the bus ends up getting hit by a train. The rest of the story is Frank trying to deal with what he was a part of, and of course he suffers a massive concussion. Good story. I think it brought up some good questions. It was written by, gosh, I can't remember. I don't remember if Jim Starlin wrote this one. Punisher Ghosts of Innocence came out January of 1993, written by Jim Starlin. And if you're used to his cosmic stuff, wait till he hops into the street level. He definitely writes a story that makes you think about the character. I mentioned on the podcast that this is probably one of the first times that I think of Frank Castle, the character, not Punisher. In a Punisher book, because that's normally what you're thinking about is the Punisher, but this gets down to it to where it makes you think about the man that's underneath the skull of the Punisher. Yeah, that's the Unspoken Issues podcast where we talk about 90s comics. Mark and I just finished up a discussion on 3 books from DC Comics. Now it's all centered around Jim Gordon, and we did Gordon of Gotham, Gordon's Law, and GCPD. All 3 of them were a fun discussion. And next up, you can hear me and Mark talk about The Mask, a trilogy of stories. He got a Mask omnibus, and wow, this ain't your Jim Carrey Mask, folks. Yeah. This is some gritty, violent, very violent comics. So Mark and I kind of get into a good discussion on that first episode, and that'll be airing here in about a couple weeks. But with that being said, we're getting out of here. Thank you all very much for joining us. That over there is Evan Bevins. I'm Jesse Starcher. Have a great evening. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.